I had moved back from Germany to Seattle and adopted a couple of kids. I think I described some of their difficulties. They were 7 and 10, and we were living in Seattle. And I was finishing up work with Government Accountability Office, GAO.
Did you always move back to this area because that was your familiarity?
No, we moved back because this is where my wife's family was. And she wanted to be close to family, and we thought, our son that we adopted in Germany, he needed to be close to family too. So the normal career path for people who were living over there would have been to go back to DC and work in the headquarters and move up the ladder and eventually become, a high-level, bureaucrat. But we thought it's not about my career. It's about family, and so we came back to Seattle.
I had another question. I don't want this to make a political conversation, but the work when you worked for the government, that office, what's it called?
It was GAO, Government Accountability Office.
And isn't their job to audit the government?
Yes.
And right now they're saying we need to have a party or an organization that does that. And it's like, well, we already do that.
Well, yeah, and so we're an independent. GAO is an independent, bipartisan, objective office. Each of the executive branch agencies also have what they call an inspector general, which does their own investigations. It's internal.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be independent, somewhat independent. But GAO is known for their independence and their accuracy.
It sounds like maybe, though, we already have what people are asking for, but maybe they have limited power in what they can do as far as like, here is a issue we're finding, and then we're asking whoever to police themselves, maybe, is the issue versus...
Well, there are always recommendations that come out of the studies. And I would say that a lot of people say we got to investigate it. Chances are it's already been investigated multiple times from different angles.
Right.
We just don't know about it.
Yeah.
Most issues we investigate are not simple.
Right.
And so we want simple answers to complex problems, and that's usually not the way.
Elon's the king of trolling, and he had a conversation with Trump on X the other day.
Right.
And he's said it a few times where I'll be your minister of government efficiency. And, me and you had already talked, and you told me about you did, and I was like, well, I think that organization already exists. I just don't know how much teeth they have as far as, here's our recommendation, but can they actually punish or, how do you punish the government?
Well, voters do that.
Right, but as far as...
And you become transparent.
But as far as, let's say your report was like, hey, not only were you inefficient with the resources, but you used them detrimentally, who then... I'm assuming you would have reports like that would come out.
Yeah, and then so they would be issued to the Congress.
So not necessarily to the party at fault.
Well, we always would include, let's say we were looking at the Agency for International Development. And I was on a job where we looked at some trade issues in Mozambique. And the U.S. government was funding the purchase of vehicles, but they were buying, the locals were buying Toyotas, not Chevrolets. And a lot of our foreign aid is a way to support our own thing.
Yeah, we want you to buy American products.
That's right. And so there was a complaint that, hey, all of our money's going to buy Japanese vehicles. And so, we took a 2-week trip down there and interviewed people. And I don't want to go into the details, but eventually we wrote a report. And the one thing that we found that was wrong was that the AID had not published a request for proposals in, the right places. Therefore, the American automotive companies didn't know about the opportunity to bid. Now, none of them had a presence in Mozambique, so if they'd have bought Chevys or Fords or whatever, there was no infrastructure to repair them.
Yes.
So it made sense because Toyota was already there for the government to support organizations that were buying Toyotas.
Yeah.
But there was this one technicality. So we would report those findings. And AID then had to say, sorry, we should have done this, and we got to make sure that we don't, omit that part of the process again.
But then the issue wasn't actually resolved.
Well, we didn't. I mean,
there was so let's bring it. So that's an interesting example. Again, we don't want to get too political, but Biden said, "I'm going to make all these electric chargers." Right? That was one of his promises, and now they're joking that for whatever the amount is, billions of dollars, he's made like 5 chargers.
I don't think that's true.
Right.
I see 5 or 10.
Well, that may not be him. That could be whoever. But so let's say there probably is some discrepancy in how many he's built, right? So your office there should be someone at your office that's maybe investigating that to be like,
perhaps
this is, and is all your
Department of Transportation has studies.
Yeah.
The Federal Highway Administration. I mean, the government is huge.
Right. It's massive.
And before they make big decisions, they usually study these things. Now, every once in a while, the politicians will come out and say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. For instance, during George H.W. Bush, his administration, when the fall of the Soviet Union occurred, he said, we're going to put 500 Peace Corps people in Russia and Eastern Europe. And it was like, okay, that was his promise. I ended up doing a study of how that worked, and it was kind of a disaster. And we issued a report about it. It's working in a developed country like Russia or Poland is different than working in, Zambia. And the whole personality of Peace Corps people who were laid back was very different than what Russia and Poland and Bulgaria needed. They needed MBAs, lawyers, people who could help with,
actual infrastructure.
Well,
if you're third world,
designing the democratic institutions and capitalism and finance and banks and all that kind of stuff. So if Peace Corps hadn't adjusted, they didn't adjust kind of their culture and the kind of people they were looking for and the way they operated, which was very laid back, you end up getting lawyers and MBAs and you send them into a situation and the job hasn't been set up, the support systems aren't there. They start calling the congressman saying, what the heck is going on here? So then we get the call to go in and investigate this. So politics people can make promises. And oftentimes, they're pie in the sky or they sound good, but there's a whole bunch of other things that come in the way. There's bureaucracy. There's bureaucracies in other countries.
Yeah, and the one
implementation is not even.
And that's the thing. It's
smooth.
With them wanting to enforce everyone to have electric cars, it's like, do we actually have the infrastructure to do that? And that's a whole nother conversation. But having talked to you, it's now made me, when I hear something, it's like, all right, the government probably has a version of that. It's just like, if someone really wanted to know, were all your investigations public?
Yeah.
Is there a website people can go to and read that stuff?
Every report.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds.
Yeah. So for anyone who's listening, Elon.
GAO.us.gov.
There already is a ministry for that.
There is it's the legislative side.
Yeah.
So what he's probably talking about is he wants to be the efficiency czar in the executive branch. Well, we have, we hired people to run these things, and the IG, the Inspector General's office, usually is not looking at efficiency.
Yeah.
They're looking at scandals or, some other aberration, and we could have a whole conversation about efficiency and effectiveness in leadership in government.
Yeah.
Boeing is a private company, and they're having problems. So, anytime you got a big organization, you're going to have places where things aren't working very well.
Yeah. And when you have guys like Elon and Vivek who have done private companies or run private companies, or they have to be efficient, right? Where government entities, you should be efficient, but when it's not your money, you think it's an endless supply. So we'll end that part, but let's go back to your life. But yeah, whenever I have a conversation with someone about whatever topic, then I tend to notice that more in the news, where because I've talked to a pilot now, I now notice you start seeing articles in the news about this person dying because of whatever, because he crashed his airplane. So yeah, I'm just seeing that more, and it's the next few months are going to be
I think
pretty aggressive.
We need to be really careful about where we get our information and believing everything we hear.
Correct.
And so we actually need to get unbiased information from multiple sources.
The unbiased is hard because I don't. You're right. I think, yeah, you just have to listen to multiple sources, because whatever source you're listening to, whether it's CNN or Fox, they're both biased in their opinion. And if you're an independent voter, because the left are going to go with the left, the right, most of them will go with the right, but there's 50 million independent voters, and for them it's hard to see through the noise.
I agree.
So, all right, back to, so you moved to Seattle, you finished your contract.
Seattle, West Seattle, working for GAO, have now 3 adopted kids. And a couple things were happening. I was getting frustrated with GAO and how long it takes to get to reach perfection in your reports. So we would study some issue, and it might take 6 months or a year, but the process to get the product out the door was so laborious because I call it anal. Perfection was the standard. And so everything, first of all, you'd write a report and it would go up to the next level, and they'd want it to, be rewritten, or it was not uncommon to have 15 drafts, draft number 1, 2, 3, depending on who read it, and they had their comments, and so you make changes. That bothers me because I want to move fast and be efficient. But because the standard was perfection, and we had to make sure that everything we had written was backed up with evidence, that takes time. Because we couldn't make any mistakes, because then we could be accused of being biased. So that was frustrating to me. But also at the same time, I've got 3 kids in public schools, and I'm thinking, the schools maybe aren't all that great, but maybe they are in elementary school, but they're moving up into middle school and high school.
Was your income pretty good? And how many hours were you working when you were doing that?
I was working full time. So,
but were you putting in more than 40 hours?
Maybe a little more. Way less than when I was working in in the private sector doing nonprofit stuff. There it was like 60 and 70 hours. So
you're working a typical 9 to 5, but
yeah,
you're just kind of
stay a little longer. But it was a nice, comfortable job, and I was making double what I had.
But you're kind of tired of the bureaucracy.
I'm tired of the bureaucracy, and I'm also now a dad with 3 challenging kids. And so I decided I need to have better schools for my kids, and I'm getting tired of this GAO stuff, but I still have those skills. So
how old were you at this time?
I was 45. So at that time, I started looking elsewhere, and there was a position in the Washington State Legislature that was similar to GAO. They have their own bipartisan investigative audit evaluation arm, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee
For the state of
for
Washington.
the state of Washington. So it's basically the same thing as JO, only for the state government. And every state has something like that. And so I ended up applying for, and I got a job down in Olympia. So I took that job and I commuted from Seattle for about 6 months, and then eventually we moved to Olympia.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of driving from.
It was, yeah, it
But
was.
traffic
It was
that bad back then? Probably not.
We were going against the traffic, but we
Yeah.
also had there was a van pool. There was a whole bunch of people who lived in Seattle who were working in different government positions down in Olympia. So there was a van of 9 people that we'd meet someplace in South Seattle, and then we'd pile into the van and we'd go. So you could use that time to sleep or meditate or listen to music or read a book or whatever it is. So it
Yeah,
wasn't totally-
CDs were probably a thing back then, or cassettes.
I don't know. We had Sony Walkmans. I was driving to help defray the cost, so I would probably drive 2 or 3 times, and I like to drive.
Your control of your own fate.
Well, and I could, I go fast. So we had this thing. It's like, how fast can you get there? It was like, I set the record. But anyway, it was fun. And then eventually we moved down there and got a nice house inside the city limits of Olympia. It's a great community for families. It's a white collar community. Tumwater, Lacey on both sides. So I was dropping my kids off at school on the way to work. That was nice. And I did a couple studies there. One was a huge study of K-12 education finance, and how the money is used and spent, and does that make a difference? Because in the state of Washington, the state budget, half of it goes to education. About 40% goes to K-12, and about 10% goes to higher ed. And it's in our Constitution as it's the primary thing that we do. So
let me ask you this.
there was this consensus, like, we're spending all this money. Is it working? And are we seeing results? So I led a study that took about 18 months to look into all the different aspects. And it included side jobs that looked at how do school districts disclose their financial expenditures. So we looked at kind of best cases of school districts' financial reports, things like that. And I had done 3 years after we came back from Germany. Most of my work had to do with K-12 finance on a national scale. So we were evaluating state school finance systems. So I was familiar with kind of the big picture, and now this was kind of telescoping down to
And this is like
Washington.
billions of dollars?
Billions.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like 10 or 12 billion a year on K-12. It's probably more like 15 billion.
I'm curious. So,
And that's the state money. That's not the local money.
so
And the state's picking up maybe half or maybe 3/4. And so there's a whole bunch of money being raised at the local level.
yeah.
And there's some federal.
So I can understand better. When you have education, you have a school district, right? Because people talk about certain school districts
Yep.
have better teachers, better schooling, better funding.
Yep.
And I think we talked about this off record, but so let's say I live in Linwood, but I live in unincorporated Linwood. And so because of that, if I call 911, Linwood City won't come to me. They're like, no, the county will come to you, which is weird. So
Right.
let's take this to
So
school
your police
example.
is covered by the sheriff, not
Yeah.
the local player.
So from a school perspective, if you have a school there, so there's Martha Lake Elementary, right? Who's all funding that? You have the city, the county, and the state all funding that?
Well, let's take a step back. All the territory is carved up into school districts. There's 2.
And they aren't necessarily within counties.
That's right. I mean,
It's not county based, it's just
no.
school districts.
Now,
Okay.
Maryland has 13 counties and they have 13 school districts.
Okay.
So
School
that makes it
districts
easy.
yeah, school districts aren't. Yeah, because I'm in Edmond School District, but I live in
Linwood.
which
Right.
okay.
And they probably serve Mount Lake Terrace. So when I worked in, eventually, my last career before my current one, I was working in the Mukilteo School District, and we served kids in Mukilteo, Everett, and Linwood.
Yeah.
So,
So cities don't necessarily. Okay. Okay. That makes
and
sense.
it's usually the state gives money, the feds give money, the local money is raised from taxes in that
Yeah, because you
jurisdiction.
can see when you go pay your taxes for your house, hey, this much is going to school.
Yep.
So how much of the funding for that local school is probably from the local people who live there?
Maybe 15%.
Only 15%.
Yeah.
Wow. And then what's the other cuts coming from?
Well, the state is probably doing 75%.
Wow. And they're getting their money from just people paying their taxes.
Right.
Okay. And then the Fed will then
Fed
chip in.
is probably 7 to 8%, depending. A tribal on tribal land, they're going to get a lot of federal money from Bureau of Indian Affairs and that kind of stuff.
If 75 is coming from the state, how does the state then allocate how much money? Because before I was thinking this through, and I was like, okay, I could understand if you're in a neighborhood where all the houses are $2 million, you're going to raise more in taxes for that school because of such. So if you're in a neighborhood with $500,000 homes, they're going to have less money. But you're saying the state's covering a way more percentage than the local area.
That's true. And what we discovered when I was working at GAO, some states were relying, half of the funds came from the local community and half came from the state. That resulted in huge disparities because of the issue you're talking about. You have a poor community, they're not going to be able to provide much extra money versus a well-off community. They can actually, the rate can be low, but the revenue base is so big that they can raise a ton of money, and you get the haves and the have-nots. So it becomes an equity issue.
How do you, as a
And the fix to that is to have the state allocate the largest proportion, so you're not.
and is that what
Basing-
Washington State does?
Yes.
Do they look at
and
how
most states are moving in that direction. Washington was one of the better states from an equity point of view. So that we didn't have as big a disparities. I mean, you go to like Illinois or Mississippi, where their system is, based a lot on the local revenue. Poor cities, poor towns, they can't raise much, and there also has to do with the businesses. So like Tukwila, which has South Center in their school district, they can raise a ton of money from business, so they don't have to raise taxes on a low income area. So you got the wealth of the people, but you also have the businesses. Issaquah, they've had major budget issues because they don't have the industry base. They have a huge residential community, but
they're usually
and they're taxed really high, but they're still falling short of what they feel like they need because the state's really just covering basics. And you get and so basic education is what is in the Constitution.
So to help,
So you want to add more athletics, or you want to have special programs or enrichment, that all costs more. And if you've got a good tax base, you can raise those funds and people will vote for it. They have to pass the maintenance levies and the bonds for housing. You're building new schools because your population is growing, but you have to get 60% approval. Marysville's having a big problem because it's growing, but the people don't want to be taxed anymore. So their bonds are failing, so their schools are like 3,000 kids.
yeah.
We got major problems up there. So, we could talk a long time about this particular issue, but it's complicated. For every big problem, there's a simple solution, that's probably wrong. Because things are complicated and there's multiple facets and issues going on.
So let's say I'm a parent thinking about putting my kids in certain schools. I should factor in, like, does this area have businesses to help fund the school, not just residential?
Well, I wouldn't do it that way, because even if the school district has more money, they then allocate it to the schools. They allocate it within their own budget to programs, whether it's athletics or gifted or music, non-academic things,
The one thing I never understood.
transportation, and I mean, I've spent 2 decades looking at the issue of effective schools.
Okay, what's an effective school?
Okay, so let me just get back to the story of the chronology. So I work for JLARC doing investigations, a couple different studies. One has to do with hospitals versus doctors and some certification process. The other is this K-12 finance and performance. So 2 reports in 18 months. And in that process, I got to know the people at the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, or OSPI. They're the state Department of Education in Olympia. And I was asking them for a lot of data, and we ran our report by them to see, if just to keep them in the loop. And we had legislative staff overseeing us as well, the heads of the education committees in the House and Senate, just kind of monitoring what we were doing. And in that process, I got to know the people at OSPI. And I made a comment. I said, you guys have all this data and you have nobody to analyze it or interpret it or, try to figure out, is it making a difference? When that report finished, they reached out to me and said, we've created a new job called Director of Research and Evaluation, and we'd like you to apply. So I thought, well, I've been in the legislative branch for, for the feds and the state. This would be a launch into the executive branch. So I applied, I got the job.
Sounds like they made the job for you. So
Kind of they did.
they're
They
telling you
knew
to
that
apply.
they had a need to improve the way they look at all their data: student data, finance data, school district data, individual programs. Is it working? Assessments, all that kind of stuff. So they brought me on, and they didn't know what to do with me. They just put a desk in the middle of a room, and people wondered why I was there.
You're like, I'm a director. And they're like,
And it's yeah, and it's it was pretty strange. And so basically, people who were around me that were charged with things that they didn't want to do, they said, well, let's give Pete that to Pete. So all of a sudden I had, a workload, and I was doing these legislatively mandated reports. And then about that time, George Bush was elected, and the new accountability system came into play, No Child Left Behind, which was a way to hold schools accountable, not districts, but schools. To me, the unit of analysis needs to also be the district, because you can have good schools and bad schools within the same district. So eventually I got to be the lead on all the federal accountability stuff. Adequate Yearly Progress, AYP, was kind of the metric.
were you the only person in the government looking into this, or did you have a team?
Well, there was a team of people. There were people that ran the federal programs under Title I. And of course, there was lots of oversight from the state superintendent and the state board. And we were required to put together a plan on how we would implement the law. I became like the number 2 person, but the brains behind the plan. The number 1 person was the person who was in charge of the federal office. But, he was busy with, all these other things. So because it was data and analysis and complicated, they deferred to me. So I basically designed the system with the help of other people looking at the rules. to show how our state was going to comply with this new law. I got the name AY Pete because I was the designer of the system. And as it rolled out, schools were being labeled as failing schools because their scores weren't high enough.
Of a system that you created.
Well, by 2014, every school had to like be perfect. And so we had like 13 years to get there. So we had to design metrics for progress, at the school level, subgroup level, races.
And you were the one that helped design these metrics?
Yes.
And where did you come up with what metrics to use?
Well, there were some rules that we had to follow. There were also a number of smart people that I relied on and that I bounced ideas off of. We had lots of drafts. And there was, I mean, it was a 15-page Q&A for, all these different ways to get around things. So you might not hit the goal, but there was some back door that you could get it if you averaged 2 years or 3 years with data to show that on average you met the improvement goal. Ends up being very complicated.
Yeah, I bet.
But in the meantime, I'm thinking we don't have any good information about how to help schools. And so one of the first things I published was something that is still around called the 9 characteristics of high-performing schools. So I studied the research about good schools, great schools, and failing schools, and looked
On
at
a national level?
national. Yeah. Yeah. So urban, rural, big, small. These are mainly academic studies. And we looked at what do the good schools have that the other schools don't have, and we came up with these 9 different things.
Before you tell me the 9, because I'm going to ask.
You'll have to look it up, but I can tell
Yeah, I
you
don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you remember all of them, but how do you? For me, one thing if I was putting my child into school, I would want to know that the people who work there actually want to be there and actually care about what they're teaching. And I was fortunate enough to go to a private school where the teachers wanted to be there. Well, they were missionaries, so they had to raise support to be there. So you knew they wanted to be there.
Yep.
And then you knew they cared about the kids, and they cared about their teaching, and they were passionate about it. So you could have someone that wasn't that intelligent, but as long as they cared, to me, that's like half the battle. Versus you may have someone that's smart, but if they don't care and it's literally just a paycheck,
Yep.
then doesn't matter what program you throw at it. So that's just thinking out loud. It's like, how do you put a metric on, do you care about what you're actually doing?
Well, one of the main, probably the most important of the 9 is having an effective leader.
Yes.
So that means the principal and other people in the building who are leaders. They might not have it might be a department chair, or it might be like my wife was a 5th grade teacher at an elementary school close by. And because she's seasoned and because she had wisdom to understand how things were working and not working, and she also had the guts to talk to the principal about things he should do, she became known as the 5th grade teacher that people wanted to have their kids in that class.
Yeah.
So then it involves, as a parent, what you want to do is find, it really comes down to the teacher. If you've got a good principal, chances are they're going to be getting the not so good teachers out and hiring good teachers.
I hear that's harder than it.
It is very hard. That's another 2-hour conversation. But of the 9 characteristics, the most important one is having a good, effective leader, or multiple leaders, high expectations, a clear focus, an alignment of what you're teaching and what is being assessed, good instruction, professional development for the staff, parent involvement. These are some of the 9, and you can Google it and put in 9 characteristics of a high-performing school, put in my last name, and it's available.
Yeah, because thinking back, this is 20 plus years ago. I can still remember some of my good teachers. And one of the things that I would say that made them good teachers was they cared about the student and
Yep.
they cared about like my science teacher,
Yeah.
he loved science. Like he loved it.
Right.
He loved teaching it. And that joy was then passed on to us because he loved it so
Yeah,
much.
it wasn't a job for him. It was a calling. It was
Yeah.
a mission. And you want to have those kind of people. When I was working in the Mukilteo School District, there was one particular school, and actually we studied high-performing schools in the state. And to jump ahead a little bit, after being at OSPI, and No Child Left Behind was getting to be more and more obvious to not be an effective system.
Yeah.
Because
Well, didn't they say they were just passing kids that shouldn't have been passed?
no, because there were assessments. I mean, the research on retention is that that ends up not being a good way to do it. But there were state assessments from grades 3 to 8 and then in grade 10. It doesn't mean that they had to pass a test to move on, but it was a system check to see how well we were doing. Well, the bar kept getting higher and higher and higher. And it was like we all had to have 100% of our kids, pass the test, even the ones that show up on day one and they don't even speak English. I mean, that's absurd. So I eventually, this is getting ahead of me a couple careers, but we designed a better accountability system, which had different sets of metrics that made sense. And one of the metrics had to do with how is your school doing relative to other schools that are like you. We call it a peer group. And so there are metric ways to look at adjusting for economics and poverty level and language and special ed. I mean, if you have a school that has a special program for special ed kids, guess what? They're not going to pass the test, and it's going to make that school look like it's not very good. But that's because it's got a special program. So you wouldn't want to compare that with some place like on the plateau of Redmond, where kids.
Every house
you can be a crappy teacher, and the kids are still going to pass the test because of their genes and their home life.
Yeah.
So anyway, we ended up creating a better system. But in my role, so I was at OSPI for 7 years as the director of research, evaluation, and accountability, and we produced a number of reports that were helpful. So why do we have an achievement gap and how to fix it? Why are kids dropping out of school and how can you get them to graduate? What are the characteristics of high-performing schools? What are the characteristics of high-performing school districts? All these different things. The one thing that I think is noteworthy in my career path is a story when I inherited a report on graduation rates. Should I keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. There was a legislative requirement to report on graduation rates for each school across the state every year.
This is all publicly published, so
Yes.
people could
Yep.
view
It's
this
all
if they want.
for free on the web. And the guy who was in charge of doing that report was not in my office. He was somebody who was like in IT and he had data, and so he was going through. He wasn't a data analyst, but he would just put together some numbers and he issued the report. Well, he got another job in another part of the state, and so it was like, who's going to do this? So they said, okay, Pete, you're the guy who does these annual reports for the legislature. We're going to give this to you. And I said, okay, great. So I started looking at his data, and it didn't make any sense. We were reporting 90% graduation rates, and I thought, I looked at all the data, and I realized it wasn't accurate. And so it actually took me a while to figure out what was going wrong. What he was doing was taking the number of 12th graders who entered at the beginning of 12th grade and saying how many of them graduated. Well, When I think of graduation rates, I think about K-12, not grade 12. So there are kids
generally if
dropping
you're
out.
going into 12th
There,
grade, you're
yeah. So there are kids dropping out when they're in ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, and then there are other kids who continue to school, usually because they just hadn't gotten enough credit. So they were in their fifth year, sixth
super
year, seventh
seniors.
year, super seniors, or with special ed kids. The law say you got to be able to serve them up until age 21. So you got kids who are still in school until they're age 21. So they're in school, in high school for 7 years.
So you've seen 21-year-old seniors?
Well, 20 and, yes. Yeah. And usually they have a disability or they don't speak English.
Yeah.
They arrive from Sudan and they're still learning English.
Yeah.
So when I realized that we were misrepresenting the truth, I devised a way, and we didn't have data on the ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade dropouts for previous years. So we created a system to basically assume that what would happen back then was what happened this year. So we took the ninth grade graduation rate for this current year and said, that's the rate we're going to say you had as dropouts 3 years ago. Same for 10th grade, same for 11th grade. Eventually, we came up with a graduation rate of 67%. Wow. That didn't go over very well with the state superintendent. So it's like, we've been reporting 90%, and Pete says we're at 67%.
Probably ruffled some feathers there.
And so she had both of her deputies come down and talk to me about what's going on. And I laid out for them what the problem was. And they both agreed that I was right. And to the state superintendent's credit, she came clean. And basically, when we came out with 67%, she said, we're facing the brutal facts. We got a problem.
What year was this?
2001, maybe.
Do you think it's gotten worse or better?
It's gotten better.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And that's another 2-hour conversation. Because there's just multiple things, especially with COVID and the rules that changed for graduation.
Do you still kind of monitor this yourself for fun?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, all of a sudden, graduation rates went up during COVID because kids weren't taking the test, and that was a barrier. I mean, you had to pass the test to graduate, or there was, and because that doesn't really make sense, there were other backdoor ways to graduate, to like an alternative way of showing your proficiency. And maybe it was the fact that you got accepted to community college.
Yeah, they're saying these kids over the past 4 years are in a tough spot because they didn't really have a normal high school.
That's true.
Then they went to college. Like, just kids that have been from like 9th grade to even first couple years of college. It's been a very weird time.
Yeah, it's and learning via being online without having a teacher there, kind of holding people accountable and also teaching. Scores have gone down. But graduation rates have gone up because you didn't have the test and you had all these other ways. So they were
Who's designing this test? Is it a state test or a nationwide test?
It's a state test, but it's designed by national companies.
Because I took a test. It was the Iowa Basic Test.
Yeah, IPBS.
Yeah, and I had to take that.
Yeah.
I was like, why am I taking this Iowa test?
That's what they
and
call,
I was in the
that's
Philippines.
what they call a norm reference test.
Yeah.
Which means you get scores that get, there's a bell-shaped curve and you can be in the top 1%.
So there's a few.
But that doesn't mean you know it. It just means you're better than 99% of the people.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the state moved from norm reference tests in the 90s to a criterion-based reference test called the WASL back in 1997 and 98 and 99. It evolved. And basically it says we have standards of what you need to know, and we're going to see whether or not you know it or not. And we're going to assess you on how well you know those standards. And so you could be in the 65th percentile, but you could be well below standard because, 65th percentile meant you were, compared to other dumb people. So, you know, you can say you're in the top 5% or top 1%, but you still might know crap compared to what an educated person should know. So there was a shift in the assessment system, the shift in the education system. The teachers were going nuts because they're saying, we're testing too much. Well, actually, they weren't testing. They were doing quizzes and tests and chapter tests all the time. It just happened to be there's another state test, and it's going to be used for accountability purposes. So it could potentially label your school as a failing school. So nobody was losing their jobs. Their money, their salary didn't depend on it, but it was just a way to complain about, some new state mandate. I ended up working in the assessment office and working with these testing companies and designing them and analyzing the results, as well as doing research and evaluation and all the accountability stuff. So I was, a data scientist. My background is in statistics and numbers and finance.
You were only an educator, if I remember correctly, like your first couple of years.
Right. Yeah, I was a teacher.
Did you have
2 years in secondary school?
when you were doing all these things? Were you talking to people? Were you talking to teachers and principals to
Back
help
then?
you? Yeah.
No. We were all on our own. I showed up in South Korea
Oh no, not back then. I'm talking about in when you were.
at OSPI.
Yeah.
I was doing professional development and training about what a good school looks like.
Yeah. But were you interacting with teachers to get their feedback? Because I'm sure some of these teachers are like, who's this guy making this stuff if he's never been a teacher before?
Well, I have been a teacher, and I'm also relying on the data.
Yeah.
So we looked at, I think there were 25 kind of meta studies on these concepts. So really we're probably looking at 100 or 200 studies looking at the common characteristics. So I wasn't consulting with teachers, but they all would agree. And it's based on, sound research, usually from academia. So it ends up being that 9 characteristics study is being used all over the world now as a measure for how are we doing. So there are surveys that are given to parents and teachers and students, asking them questions that relate to these 9 characteristics, and they kind of like give them feedback. What the report doesn't have is we know what's good, but we don't tell you how to get there. So if you've got really low scores, self-assessment on these 9 characteristics, there's nothing in that says, okay, you need to do this, this, and this. But that's where a strong leader who has an understanding of a school system comes in, and they can say, do we have high expectations for our kids? Are we involving parents? Is what we're teaching in the classroom what we should be teaching? Do we have a common sense of a vision of, what we're all about?
How much of that is dictated by the district versus the principal for that school?
It's mostly on the principal, and the principal has the ability to pick new teachers and work to get rid of teachers that shouldn't be in the profession, and that takes a lot of work. But it can be done and should be done, and it's not often done. Or I would say, in any particular school, there's probably 10 to 15% of the teachers that shouldn't even be there. And there's maybe 20% that are really super. And then there's a whole bunch in the middle that are decent, column B, sometimes maybe even a C. It's a job. There are some people who leave, right at 4 o'clock and go home, and, they've been doing it for a while, so they got their systems down. And there are other teachers who are really dedicated. I mean, my wife was coming home at 6, 7 o'clock at night getting ready. And she was an unbelievable teacher. And I have the data from assessments to support it. We have really interesting conversations because
The current wife or the
with my current wife,
Okay.
who is a teacher, about her test scores, how her kids are doing, stories from the students, stories about other teachers, stories about the principal, stories about the central office. Again, another 2-hour conversation. But anyway, so at OSBI, I had this job for 7 years doing research, evaluation, accountability, assessment stuff. And after a while, I hired a good team, and things were going fine, and I get bored easily. So I was feeling like, I'm getting into a rut here, and it's not really as challenging, and my kids are growing up. By the way, my kids are having major problems in their life. Just mental.
Were you seeing
mental illness.
therapists and all that stuff?
Yeah.
It's just when you've gone through that much trauma, right? You can love them as much as you can, but it's hard to overcome trauma.
It is. In fact, in our last conversation, you asked about what are some of those things that you don't know until you experience them.
We'll get that to the end. There's some fun questions about it.
There's 3 or 4, but trauma is one of them.
Yeah.
And there's different kinds of trauma. Whether it's inflicted on you or something happens, there's a death, or you witness something horrible or something happens to you. But yeah, the 2 kids that we had adopted later had both experienced traumatic trauma in their home environment. Plus, their gene pool was not very good. So that starts going south with one of my kids, to the point where she had to go into a mental institution, and issues of suicide, and drug use.
And she's like mid-teens at this point?
Yeah. She turned 16 when she was in a mental institution.
And you probably, it's one thing if, because she wasn't your birth child, you probably didn't take it as personal as far as, and I'm just guessing. So if you had that child from 0 to 16 and she was having those issues, it'd probably be, it was hard regardless, but you knew that there was trauma that you didn't cause that played a part in that, versus if your child is having those kind of issues and you're like,
it's my fault.
Yeah. Or you're like, this wasn't my fault. I am trying to help her.
I never thought in that way.
Yeah.
She was our kid.
Right.
And we knew it was going to be hard because of the background. Mm-hmm. And genes are really powerful, and the environment in early life is very powerful. So the odds are stacked way against her and her brother. And you do what you got to do.
Did that cause strain in your marriage?
Yes, it did. And getting a little bit ahead of myself, but it caused strain. In the meantime, the youngest one, who we adopted in Germany, he's starting to reflect some of the genetic predispositions that he has in school, and he ends up hanging around some of the wrong people, and starts to dabble in drugs, and he's in middle school. I'm also coaching the basketball team and the baseball team for my kids. I also, during that time, decided to go back to school and get my doctorate at University of Washington.
This is your early 50s, late 40s?
Well, it's around, it's probably, I'm turning 50. So I've got this fairly high stress job at work. I've got 3 teenagers that are going sideways, and I'm also working full time getting my doctorate at the University of Washington from Olympia. Luckily, it was the kind of thing where we met once a month for a couple of days, and then we did our work through, remotely. So I got my hands full.
Was it worth getting your PhD?
Yes. 1, I'm a lot smarter. 2, I understand things better. 3, there's a bump in salary on the state salary schedule, so that basically pay for teachers and administrators is based on education level and years of experience. And when you have a doctorate, they add another, $4,000 or something to your salary. So whatever I spent on getting the doctorate, I end up getting back.
So the state didn't help you with, I didn't know if the state had a program to help you with further education.
They didn't. I paid for this myself. But like we had to take a home equity line of credit on our house because the hospital bills for my daughter were, in the tens of thousands of dollars.
So insurance didn't help
Insurance
cover
did
that.
not cover it. Or I don't know what it was. I just know that we were like 30
It's
grand.
crazy because you were
30 grand in a
a
hole.
state employee. You think you'd have
Yeah, I know.
good
I know,
insurance.
I know. And
we won't have to get into all that, but
yeah, but
usually people like working for the government because
I look back and I wonder, why did we have to pay for that? But and maybe it was a private, it was not that far from here. It was 2 or 3 miles from here.
yeah.
Little did I know that I would be living so close to that facility.
And at the time, you were still living
I was still in Olympia.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we had an agreement with the kids' parents that we would drive them, that we'd let them see them every other weekend.
Ooh.
So the dad died, but the mom was still living, and she was living in Seattle. So every other weekend, I would drive them up, drop them off, go back down, and then 2 days later, I'd drive them up, pick them up, and take them.
Do you think that was not helpful?
It was not helpful. In retrospect, it was a bad idea.
Because you're exposing them to whatever.
Yeah, they were going back into a toxic environment.
And the point was to save them from that.
Yeah, and so it was like taking a step back every 2 weeks. And the teachers could always tell when the kids came back into school that they had had a bad weekend.
Yeah, if someone's being abused, you don't take them back to that abuse situation.
Yeah, and we didn't know.
Because the kids wouldn't tell you?
No, they didn't. They would be quiet. And they had agreement that we were not going to talk about what happened at home. So, they were living in trauma and didn't talk about it.
Yeah, so that's not helpful because it's not only for the first 10 years or so they were raised in it, but now you're exposing them.
And the mom was saying bad things and sowing seeds of doubt about us, our motivation, what we're trying to do. It was just BS. It's not a smart woman. She was damaging her kids even more. So anyway, that was, and that went on for years.
What if you stopped doing that?
It went on for 10 years.
What if you stopped doing that? Would the state then get upset at you?
I don't know.
Did you have something in paper that said you had to do that?
Yeah, I think in the adoption decree it said that.
Because again, it's already done and over with, but it's like if you would have stopped, she would have taken you to court, and she's not going to take you to court.
Yeah.
Anyways.
But we're people of our word.
Yeah.
So my daughter has since told me that was a bad idea and we should have not continued because she knew what was going on, but we didn't. And there was a couple of times when they called me in the middle of the weekend and 4 o'clock in the morning, something bad was happening, and they said, "Please come get us." And so, get up on Saturday night, Sunday morning, drive up and pick them up. So you just do what you got to do. It was not easy. In fact, I wonder how I did it. All of that. Trying to be a good parent.
Yeah, if I had to share my kid with someone else, that wouldn't work out.
Yeah, so, but after 7 years at OSPI, I was getting bored, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had been set up, and they were running a big K-12 part of their foundation. And I got to know some people who were working there, and there was one particular job evaluating the education programs of the foundation. It's like, this is perfect for me. Plus, I had some work in philanthropy. And I thought, that's interesting. So make a long story short, I got a job with them.
But don't you want to work for the state for so many years to get some kind of pension, or you didn't really care about that?
I had met that criteria.
Oh, really? So it's only
I had met the federal criteria, which is 10 years, and I had worked at GAO for 11, so I got a federal pension.
Mhm.
At the state, I think it's 5 or 7.
Really? So it's not that long.
It's not that long.
Interesting.
Not as long as the feds.
But obviously, the longer you work for the state, the bigger that pension is.
Right. But I was never thinking about that. My dad used to say, don't worry about the money. Do what you want to do. And the money will take care of itself. In fact, he said he never, whenever he was looking at a new job, he never asked about the pay. He was always just interested in what the work would involve and who he was working with and what the cause or the mission was. So I didn't really think about it that much, about, retirement. So I took the job up in Seattle, and by that time, my daughter had moved out. I think my son, my oldest son, he had joined the Marines, and he went to Iraq, and he got traumatized, and he has post-traumatic stress disorder, and he was discharged, and he has a permanent disability.
So this is the one that already came from a bad household,
Yes,
and then you got even more.
we
trauma.
got him when he was 10,
Yeah,
and so
and then
then
the military traumatized him even more.
yeah,
So it wasn't beneficial.
it was not beneficial. He should never have gone. Especially, he needed structure. Ends up, we find out he's got a brain disorder. The two halves of his brain aren't connected.
Yeah,
It was probably a birth defect, and he was always a little bit odd. And so the fact that he graduated from Olympia High School, which is a pretty darn good school with the C average, is like a miracle. And he doesn't handle stress very well. Probably because it tips off things, it's a trigger for things that happened in home, in his home life. So he goes off, has PTSD. Luckily, the government's there to pick up the tab, and so now he's in good shape. And he's married a really wonderful person who loves him just the way he is. So
what's he do for work?
he's disabled.
So he doesn't work.
No, his wife works from home, and he takes care of their kids.
Oh, nice.
So, and he coaches baseball because he loves baseball. And
So he doesn't have to. The nice thing about that situation is, life. You can't ever avoid stress, but you can kind of pick the problems that you want, and the problems he's facing to solve is his kids, and hopefully that doesn't set him off.
well, yeah, I mean, and he's a very kind, gentle human being. He's an unusual male, and his wife really loves that because she had been in abusive relationships with men. So the fact that he loves her and isn't abusive and is kind and helps out with the kids, a little bit of a goofball, and helps around the house. And he's got a really good income, and they got a VA loan for, a house. They live in New York. So he's like, great, he's set. Anyway, back to the Gates Foundation. So we move up to Bainbridge Island, and I take the boat across the water, and I take a bus to the Gates Foundation.
So why'd you move to Brainbridge?
Well, we were looking for a good school.
And you had the inside scoop, so
Yeah, and we got a good house and a good location. But my son was going to school, the one that was starting to get involved in drugs. Looking back, I wish I had him join the football team because he was a fabulous athlete. I mean, just extraordinary in physical skill, in endurance. I mean, when he was like, I don't know if I said this in the first tape, but he corrected our grammar before he was 2. We would run around when he was 3. We would run around the block, or maybe it was 4, while we're waiting in line for a pizza place. And he'd run around the block, and we would run with him. And then we would get tired. And so it was like, okay, now we'd say to my wife, it's your turn to run with him. And she'd run around the block, and she said, it's your turn. So we ran around this big block 5 times, and he's 4 years old.
Yeah, they didn't have electric
And
scooters back then.
and he said, Daddy, I run even though I get tired. It's like, yeah, no, no doubt. So, and he went out for the track team when he was in 8th grade. And he's just a goofball, but he entered the 1600, like a mile. And there was one of the best guys in the state running on the team. And so he ran with him. And basically, he was talking to him the whole time. As they're running, he's running next to him, having a conversation with the guy. And then at the very end, the guy sprints on, and my son's thinking, why is he all of a sudden running fast? And he wins. I mean, genetically, I guess his birth mother was a fabulous distance runner without even trying. So he would have been a great distance runner. He was tall, long legs, and great endurance. Very coordinated. He was, when he was growing up and he was playing pee-wee football tackle, he was like scoring touchdowns all the time because nobody could catch him. And he caught the one touchdown pass, that the team scored a year later. He would have been a great athlete. And I thought, he could probably be going to Stanford on an athletic scholarship because he's so dang smart and good athlete. He ends up hanging around. He doesn't join football when we go to Bainbridge Island. That would have given him a peer group where he could have excelled, but I didn't make him, and he didn't do it. And so he ends up hanging out with people that didn't make good choices, involved in criminal activities and drug use, etc. And there were actually times where he was arrested, and other crimes. And we actually had to do an intervention with him. One time when he was in jail, and we didn't come and pick him up until a couple of days later, he was so mad at us. He was like blaming us for his problems, and it's like, he's just not getting it. So, and he was gonna die somehow in a car crash or overdose or something. So he's, I guess, 16 at this time, maybe, 16 or 17. He borrowed my car on Father's Day and wrecked it with a bunch of buddies. So
you stole it or borrowed it?
He asked to use it, and I said, sure. But he wrecked it. So we actually did an intervention with him and it's like, what do we do? And so we consulted some people and found a place in Utah, and people came in the middle of the night and took him away on a plane. And he was down there for 7 weeks. It was about 10 grand a week. And at the end of that, a lot of kids kind of get it and they go back home. Well, he wasn't one of those kids. It's like, if he comes back home, he's going to just do the same stuff. So we actually had him live in a group home in Idaho for another year. And he went online, graduated from high school, went to Costa Rica for a few months as part of that program, and graduated. In the meantime, my wife decides she wants to divorce. We had been in some counseling together in a couple different places. I'm sensitive to who might see this video.
Yeah, I get it.
So, but basically, she decides that she's not happy and she wants a divorce. And I wasn't going to make her stay. So we go through the process of divorcing, separating, and then divorcing.
How long have you been married?
27 years. So half my life. I was 54.
I've been thinking about, obviously being a married man, I think about marriage a lot. And just this week I've been thinking about, I like frameworks, and a framework of there's different levels to a quality of marriage, and people can define it however they want, right? And I've been thinking about my marriage, the concept of marriage. I have a lot of married friends, and so my framework is okay. There's 10 levels to marriage, and
Scale of 1 to 10.
there's two ways to look at it. You can rate your marriage 1 through 10, but then there's also different levels of marriage. So you can be at level 5, which is good, and you can be rated at 10 at level 5. So, anyways, as I think about why are so many people get, over 50% of divorces over 50% of marriages end in divorce. I'm trying to find marriages that I think are rare, which is level 10, rating 10.
Do you think there are any?
I don't know.
I don't think there are.
The more I talk to people, the more they're saying that's not possible.
It's not.
So it's like, okay, what about 9s? Can I find some 8s and 9s?
There are probably times when there are 9s, but it's, marriage goes through cycles.
But so that's what I'm saying. There's the rating and then there's the level. And so I'm trying to find those level 9 marriages. I think there's level 10 marriages out there, but I think it's such a small percentage of marriages.
I guess it would depend on your metrics.
Yes.
And happiness, is it success?
Yeah.
Is it, you look back and say, I never would have done anything differently?
Yeah. So
chances are the 10s don't have much real life in them.
Well, again, rate dependent, and I think some people have again, I still have to think through this, flesh it out, probably write it out, but some people just we can look at athletics, right? Some people are just more athletic than other people.
Yeah.
Like my 11-year-old son is just more athletic than the average 11-year-old. Not too many 11-year-olds are running 1935 Ks, right? There's another 11-year-old kid that could train twice as hard and would never be able to do that.
Yeah, they have a natural gift.
And so I think you can also apply that to some people can just get along better and aren't going to be so overcome by whatever differences you have, because it's like whatever. Some people are just more agreeable than others. So some people I think have a higher aptitude to reach level 9, but I'm curious in your marriage, I know some people are listening, but if you were to look back on that first marriage from a level 1 to 10, not rating your marriage, but level 1 to 10, how high of a level do you think you got?
Well, I think it was in phases. I think the early years were 9s and 10s. And then doubts start creeping into people's mind. People get used to each other, maybe take each other for granted, aren't being honest about what they're thinking or feeling. They don't deal with it. They hide it. They stuff it. It looks good, but it's not. It's below the surface. That's what ended up happening with my first wife. There were things going on in her life and in her feelings that she had that she didn't share with me. And so they were secrets. And so she was living with it. So she was like tolerating living with me, but I was in the dark that's where she was.
Yeah, and just like fitness, you can be fit a year ago, but if you aren't putting effort and work into it, it doesn't matter that you ran a marathon last year.
Yeah.
Same thing with marriage. You can have a good marriage a year ago, but what's going on today? So there's a lot you can, Jesus spoke in parables, so there's a lot you can take from the natural physical world that's easily, you can look at those metrics and be like, am I putting effort into my marriage?
Yeah. There was a guy who was married to a woman, Christian man, married to a woman for 43 years. And eventually they got divorced. He divorced her. And when he talked to us, he said, nurture your love for each other every day. That was the only advice he gave us. So I'm thinking that when a person starts taking the other person for granted and not seeing them as special and not having, realistic expectations, one person is not going to meet all your needs. It's, well, you need to have friends. You need to have other things outside of your family that are meeting some of your needs. The Old Testament, they had multiple wives.
Was that good or bad?
Well, in that culture, when you think about
So would the
the
average
husbands who went off to war and get killed, and now they've got a widow, who's taking care of the widow? Another man comes along and takes care of the widow, and she becomes his wife. Concubines, it was a way to repopulate the military force. David had, or Solomon,
So-
we're talking hundreds of people.
yes. What about the average man? Would
The
did
average man wouldn't have had the resources to
Yeah.
support multiple wives.
Yeah.
And
So
in this world now, there are places where polygamy is fine, because it's a social safety net, because the government's not there to take care of widows. So a man would, in the Old Testament, if your brother's wife dies, or your brother dies, his wife becomes part of your family. So it's like having a village take care of each other.
yeah.
Now, eventually, we evolved into realizing polygamy is not all that great. Now we have sequential polygamy. So you married somebody, and then you divorced, and you married somebody else, and you got 3 wives, but they were just all one at a time. And then you got people who aren't getting married, but they've got multiple partners.
One thing they're saying right now is
very interesting.
it's not as simple, but they're saying the divorce rate's going down, but it's only going down because less people are getting married.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're like, hey, divorce is going down.
Yeah, and so
'Cause they're not getting married in the first place.
so people just live together, and the 50% rate has been fairly constant for a long time, but that includes the people who get married 3 or 4 times. So if you looked at how many people have been married once versus multiple times, and look at the metric differently, you end up seeing the marriage rate or the divorce rate among people who have been divorced, of all married people, is going down. Now, because people are just living together and not getting married, when they break up, it's not a divorce.
Yeah, there's no document that's
right.
like, hey, we
So,
split up. Yeah, marriage is, that point of this podcast is to talk about real things, and education is a real thing, especially if you have kids. Marriage is a real thing. Relationships are a real thing. And that's why I wanted to create a platform for myself to learn. But then whoever else decides to listen, they can hear someone else's story. But yeah, I just have this notion that things should get easier as the years go by, and some things do, right? You don't think about riding a bike, you just go do it. So there's some skills that you do once, and you don't really have to do much to keep that skill. And then there's other skills. I play basketball with my kids, and in order for me to make my threes, I have to consistently go out there and practice threes.
right.
And I was better last year at threes than I was this year, and my kids let me know. And it's like, if that's something I care about, which I don't, but I care about it because they care about it, it's like, all right, I have to go work on it this winter, go shoot threes so I can be better at it. And so as you get older, you just learn, hey, there's some things you have to practice. I just have this notion that marriage should get easier, but
No, I don't.
no such.
I think it's a little bit like wisdom. It grows, it changes. While I was at the Gates Foundation and my wife decides to divorce me, I eventually leave the Gates Foundation. So
How long were you single for from after you got
well, we were separated for probably a year, but there probably was another. Well, let me get to that. So I was at Gates Foundation, and I'm in charge of their education evaluation.
what are you evaluating? Their money?
The investments they make in K-12 education.
And that's billions as well.
Yeah, that's billions. So they have scholarships for disadvantaged youth. They have charter schools that they've helped start. They're
What's a charter school versus a private school versus a public school?
A charter school is a public school that is independent of the district and runs itself, but gets public money. So
So it's quasi.
it feels like a private school, but the money is coming from public sources.
But it got started through private funds, maybe.
There were private schools. The charter movement was starting in, I don't know, the late 1990s.
Because I've heard that term before a lot lately, and it's like, what is a charter school? So let's say
that looks like a private school.
So the Gates Foundation would initially give them money.
So what they were doing is there were organizations that were opening multiple charter schools that had a theme. So Cristo Rey, Christ the King, was a set of Christian schools that used public funds to operate, but to get that system started, the Gates Foundation underwrote kind of the formation and the implementation.
And how much would something like that? Millions?
Hundreds of millions.
But to start a school.
A school, there might be, they might give 15 million to start an organization that's going to have 15 charter schools. To get them off the ground, to launch them. So there were charter school systems around the country that they were funding. The big thing that they were doing was funding districts to make their big comprehensive high schools smaller, because their belief was we have a dropout problem and we have a problem of kids not being smart and being ready for college because our high schools are broken. And therefore, the solution to that is to make them smaller so that people would have more interaction with the teachers and the staff. It wouldn't be so impersonal. And so there was a small schools movement around the country, and they were throwing money at it. And districts were saying, "We'll take your money, and we'll promise that we're going to take this high school or that high school, and we're going to break up this 2,500 person school and put them into 4 or 5 smaller schools that had a theme."
But you'd have to build that school, wouldn't you?
Well, no, you just divide up the school building in sections. So this wing, let's think of it as you got a square. My high school was like in a square with 2 floors. It could be that wing could be, we give it a new name. It's going to be the Adventure and Technology School. And this one over here is the Arts and, whatever school. And here's, the Math and Science STEM School. And here's another, so there's a theme, and then you can gravitate to that school based on your
So did that interest.
Work? Well, it worked in some ways, but they were thinking that it would result in better test scores or better other outcomes beside, happiness, better college going rates. And so my job was to look at all these different things to see, is it working? Is it having the impact that they intended? And some were just too early to tell. The small schools movement had quite a history, so there's plenty of data. They had given, I think there were 25 schools or school districts that took the money and made the change, and I looked at kind of how were they doing before and how they were doing afterwards.
Did you ever have personal interaction with Bill and Melinda?
Yes.
One-on-one or more of a group setting?
I had one that was one-on-one. One was in a group setting.
With both of them?
And I never met Melinda.
Okay.
So Bill once, and his dad another time.
If you didn't know he was a billionaire, would you notice that there's something different about him?
No.
So he's just a normal dude that happens to be worth a ton of money. He's probably pretty smart, I'm assuming. Like if you just met the dude
Well,
randomly.
he's smart in certain things. The problem is smart people with money think they can use their money to do what they want, and people defer to them.
Is he high IQ?
Certainly.
Okay.
But he's probably also on the spectrum.
Yeah. Like Elon, like Bobby, Steve.
Yeah,
like
I
most
mean,
of
a
those guys.
lot of these are brilliant guys. That doesn't make them an expert on education. But if you pick one or two or three people to give you advice on what's wrong with schools, and they tell you our high schools are too big, you're going to come up with a strategy to address that. When really, that's probably not the problem. And that's what happened in this case, is that he got advice on what the problem was and came up with a solution for it, but it wasn't the real
He's
problem.
solving the wrong issue.
Yeah, so therefore, when we came back to saying, is this working? The answer was no. That is not what all the people in the organization had been telling them. They weren't educators. They were lawyers and MBAs, and they had drunk the Kool-Aid to believe that our schools were all broken and we needed to come up with an alternative to show that this other system will work better and therefore it will change the direction of public education in the country. The problem with the way, well, and I'm not even supposed to talk about this stuff because we sign non-disclosure agreements and we're not supposed to say bad things about the foundation. So I'll just say that when things go bad in the private sector, you bury them and don't let anybody know. When you bring that culture into philanthropy, it's a problem. Because if you're doing something that doesn't work, you need to let other people know that it didn't work. But that's embarrassing to admit you screwed up, or you had a strategy that didn't work. There are some philanthropies that have had the chestnuts to say they tried something and it didn't work, and there are lessons to be learned from that. And it didn't work because of A, B, and C. The report that got them to change the direction never saw the light of day, but at least they changed the direction and went away from small schools. So, but in the process, my life was not easy. And they made it really clear that they really weren't interested in what I had to say.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about how we want diversity and different opinions and thoughts, but then when someone actually offers a different opinion or thought, it's like, wait a minute, that's a little bit. We still want you to play with what we're saying.
Well, and in this case, it wasn't an opinion; it was backed by facts.
Right.
And if you're going to evaluate something, if it's going to go contrary to the conventional wisdom, you better have more facts. You need more evidence that what you're saying is true. So anyway, I decided to leave there after a couple of years. And so I went.
Did they pay you more than?
Way more.
So you got paid well.
You can't believe how much I got paid.
Because one thing.
And they would also match charitable giving. So if I wanted to give $10,000 to a charity, they would do a 3 match.
Yeah.
So they would give 30,000.
They have the money.
Yeah, I mean, they were all about helping good causes and having employees. If your employee wants to give funding, sure, we're going to triple it. So I was walking away from a ton of money, and just it was like, oh my goodness. But I wasn't happy, and they weren't happy with me, and I didn't want to be that way. It was a little bit like the Air Force Academy, where I wasn't happy, and yeah, you walk away from situations that you just don't want to be in. So I walked away. I resigned that organization, and then I did 3 years of private consulting with the State Board of Education, OSPI, nonprofits, school districts, doing all kinds of different studies.
So you're working for yourself, and
I'm working for myself.
Hey.
So now I'm a private contractor. And I designed this new accountability system. I designed a new compensation system for OSPI. I was helping school districts look at their data to figure out what's going on with their graduation rates. I was, that kind of thing. Nonprofit organizations that were struggling to, raise money or trying to figure out, is what they're doing making a difference. So I was very busy, and it was during that time my wife divorced me, and my son comes back from Idaho, and he's living part-time with me and part-time with my ex-wife, trying to, make a living. And I'm staying busy. Just, you never know when the next job's going to come, so you just say yes to everything. And I was working probably 80 hours.
When you got divorced, how did that affect you? Did that emotionally gut you? Did it make you rethink, who am I? What did I do?
Well,
or you kind of saw it coming?
I saw it coming through the counseling process, from things that I would hear about what was happening in her life. So when she finally said, I want a divorce, it's like, okay. And we had a mediator, and it was amicable. And, I hope she's happy. We stay in touch because we've got 3 challenging kids to deal with.
Did it make you rethink what you did?
Yeah.
How could I have avoided this or fixed
it?
Yeah,
how did we get to this point?
Yeah.
And there were some things that I saw in writing that she had written that I came across later in the process of cleaning stuff out that kind of made everything make sense, which makes me think to our earlier conversation about, things were going south for her, but I never knew about it. Fairly early in the marriage. And she had been living with me, and she wanted to be a mom, and we tried for 7 years to be, parents. Didn't work, so we ended up adopting somebody. And, then all she had is a focus. So, and then once he's grown up and he's ready to move out, it's like, okay, I don't need to be in this relationship anymore. And there were other things that she had done that were showing distance emotionally, things that were said or things that were done. So it's like, I'm thinking this is a phase, and I had no idea how deep it was for her. So it wasn't a surprise. It's very hurtful. But you learn and you move on. And I didn't feel like I had done anything that I regretted. And it's not like I was unfaithful or anything. I hadn't beaten her, but I ended up not being a good match for what she wanted. So she moved on, which then meant, do I want to live this way alone?
You're like, wait a minute, I don't know if I want.
It's like, and I remember sitting, I think it was like July 4th, and I was down by myself at the waterfront watching fireworks going off, and I'm seeing these other people, and I'm saying, this really sucks, being alone and not sharing it with somebody. So I decided I'm going to have to go online and start looking for,
How long was that? How long were you single for?
Well, it depends on what you mean by single. Because eventually I meet...
How long did you live by yourself for?
Oh.
Before you're like...
A year and a half.
So maybe. Take you long to get back on the horse.
No. So I decided I want to be in a relationship.
Yeah.
So...
well, some people get divorced. I think sometimes women get divorced and they're like, yeah, I don't need another man in my life.
She's not married again.
Or men are like, yeah, I want to...
Yeah. Well, and I ended up going on a dating site, and I had a ton of matches. It was eHarmony, so that was fairly, these are serious people about relationships, not hooking up. And probably the number of women on it is like 20 to 1.
Really? They always say it's the opposite.
Well, I don't know. At that time, my wife's experience with eHarmony, she got matched with like 3 or 4 people. I got like 10 a day. So I probably had 300 matches, and I probably dated, 25 people. And the person I'm with now was head and shoulders above everybody else. and we have a lot in common. And she's brilliant, and she's funny, and I adore her.
So what I extrapolate from that is, I'm not in your situation, but there's a lot of single people out there, and sometimes they're saying, "I can't find the one," and it's like, well, sometimes it's a numbers game. If you're not putting yourself out there, sounds like you were, and if you're not connecting with people, which sounds like you did, then it's going to be hard to find the one. And so I think you just knew, like, if I meet enough people, I'm eventually going to find the one that I can connect with and bond with. And I think a lot of young people just fail to do that. They're waiting for that, because in the movies you wait for that magical moment.
That perfect person.
Yeah.
It's just going to be obvious, right?
You wait for that one, and you experience that with your first marriage, and then with your second one, you're like, you know what? There's probably a lot of people I could get along with.
That's true.
And it sounds unromantic to say that, but your second time around, you're like, there isn't just one person out there for me.
There's probably a lot, but there's nobody perfect.
Yeah.
And I'll just share. So my second wife, she was married for 27 years or 26 years, and then she left that marriage because it lacked love. But they had a son. So now I have a stepson. And
He's an adult, I'm assuming.
he's in his 30s.
Yeah.
And so now I have a relationship with him. And he's somewhat normal compared to my kids. And so we joke about that. But, you know, all three of my other kids, I mean, they're unique in their own way. And I couldn't be more proud of my daughter, who's come through so many things. Every problem you could possibly have, she's had it. And yet now she's married and has a kid. And all the bad things that happened to her have given her empathy for people who have those kind of problems. And now she's an amazing person to help people who are in need. She's the most incredible person I've ever met. And she's got, I'm not going to go into details, but so many issues. And she needs lots of medication. But, you know, she's realizing it's not her fault. This is the biochemistry and the genetics that she inherited. And you can manage that through, you know, medications. There's still a little girl in her that says, you know, I can't read and I'm dumb because, you know, she didn't learn to read until she came to live with us when in third grade. But really, it was an opportunity, a lack of opportunity for her to learn in school because the parents enabled her to get away with not learning. They felt sorry for her, and she got away with not learning. Well, that wasn't going to happen in my family, and she ended up, you know, passing the state test in a couple of years.
So how long have you been married now?
Almost 14 years.
Well, same as me. We're about the same, because I hit 14 in 2 months.
So, and, you know, not having kids around, that makes a difference. Having good jobs makes a difference. When finances are not that big of a deal, when raising kids in teenagers.
And you also, because you've been married before, both of you, you also know what you want and are looking for, right? The first time around, when
you don't realize what's important.
In your early 20s, it's like, you don't know. So you're like, if you look attractive, I think there's some chemistry, let's figure it out. But the second time around, hopefully you're a little wiser, a little smarter, and you can be a little bit more logical about it.
And certain things are more important than others. So my stepson, he's single, but he wants to be in a relationship. So he goes on to these, you know, dating sites, and he's meeting all kinds of people. And what he's learning is that there's a lot of messed up people out there. And you also need to have your criteria not so tight. So he has certain religious and political views that have become relaxed and views about family, what he wants in a family. And initially, he had all those things in there. You got to be this, this, and this. And that restricts your options. So he's starting to like get a little more.
Especially in the state you're in, also matters.
Yeah.
If you went to a different state, it could be a different ballgame.
Yeah. And so, yeah, who knows? But the more criteria you have, the fewer options you're going to have.
Yeah.
And so he's starting to relax some of those and not say, you got to be, believe this, be a part of this political party, or you got to go to this church or not a church at all, or, you're not going to have somebody who, ticks these boxes. And it doesn't appear that he's looking for anybody who's like, a knockout 10 on the physical scale. That's not part of his criteria. It helps, but he's more interested in who the people are rather than how they look.
Yeah, I think for him though, if I won't say it loud, but if I think of if he's anything similar to your guys' beliefs and ideas and principles, a different state he would find a bigger pool of that group versus this state.
I don't know. He's very different than us.
Okay, then maybe he's in the right state.
He's probably in the right state. But he's now successful in his work. He has a BA. He's dating people who are, well educated and have interests that he has. So I remember when I was on eHarmony, there were people who seemed like a good match, but they were really into scuba diving, or they were really into riding a motorcycle. It's like, I'm not going to go there. So, and sometimes you don't find out about these things until you date them or meet them. And, there were people that could have been a great match, but I was like, I'm not going to spend my life on a motorcycle. In fact, when I was in Malaysia, I got in a motorcycle accident and I, should have died. So I decided, no, I'm not going to ride motorcycles anymore. So why would I hook up with somebody or pursue a relationship that was really important to them to have motorcycles in their life? So it was like the fit isn't there. So my wife and I have lots of commonalities. Part of it is that we are kind of the same generation. So we know the same songs. We know the same commercials. It's amazing how fun life can be when you have some of that common background. Now, people who were dating now in their 20s and 30s and 40s, they're going to have more options of people who are close to their age. But I think my wife's first husband was 7 years older than her. That seemed to have been a problem because they just were in different places. And also, I think just her criteria, her sights were not where they should have been. And in fact, when she divorced her husband, there were people saying, it's really lonely out there. You may never find anybody, are you sure you really want to do this? So her comment was, it's better to not be in a relationship where love is supposed to be there, but there is no love. That's pretty lonely.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're happy now. It doesn't mean we don't have arguments or disagreements. There are times when we just want to strangle each other. And I think that's normal because when you're living together, you're not always going to agree. Sometimes people take things in the wrong way, misinterpret, words or actions. We don't want to assume things.
So let me ask you this. You've been around a lot longer than me. I want to believe that, so you have male friends, I have male friends. I don't have contentious relationships with them, even though they've been my friends for years and years.
Your male friends?
Yeah. I don't live with them, but I would like to think that even if I did, we would be able to work it out. Especially if, I don't know, maybe it's just, again, a false idea that I have, but and I'd have to go live with a guy for 20 years and I could be like, yeah, it didn't work out very well. But yeah, I would like to think that it doesn't have to be as contentious as it is. But
Well, I don't know how much contention there is in your relationship, but I know that ours kind of comes in waves, and we are different species in a lot of ways,
correct.
males and females. It's like there's a book about, Venus and Mars, we just come from different planets. So that alone is going to cause issues.
But think about this, and maybe it's a different type of love. With your kids, they live with you or at least mine live with me. They live with me just as much as my wife does. But I don't have any. There's never a point where I'm like, I want to strangle them.
Really?
No, there isn't. Like, I was talking to one of my friends.
Well, great, good for you.
Well, you had a different.
I had, 3 really challenging kids.
Yeah,
Who were defiant and, just.
well, one of my friends I was talking to recently, and she was like, "Man, yeah, sometimes kids can be difficult on marriages." I was like, "No, we actually like our kids. Like, they're great."
Great.
And so yeah, I still
different views about how to handle different situations.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to be compassionate, and then they think the other person's being too hard, or vice versa. That's part of what makes the relationship and child rearing a challenge, is because there are different ways to approach child rearing, vacation, how you spend your time as a family, what you do on weekends. Do you take them to church? Do you not? Do you not take them to church? Do you leave them? Do you lead, or do you let them make their own choices? I mean, these are all really subjective. There are no hard and fast rules other than being a loving, caring person, and you ask for wisdom on what to do, and hopefully you're on the same page. But that doesn't always happen, and that can cause tension.
Yeah. Well, I'm still on my search for level 10 marriage and level
Well, talk
rate
to
10.
I would say, interview some marriage therapists.
I'm working on it.
Have you interviewed marriage therapists?
Well, the reason why people are going to marriage therapists is because they have issues in their marriage.
Well, so they're going to a marriage therapist because those therapists supposedly know what it takes to be a 10.
Yeah, well...
what does a 10 look like, and how do you get there from being a 6 or a 7 or a 4?
Yeah, so
and maybe what you do is you just move from a 4 to a 6 or a 7, and you just say, the alternative is a 1, so I'm going to live with 7.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you said that, because that's kind of a realization I came to this week, as far as on my search for my personal marriage, it's all about expectations. And I had this expectation of this, and then I realized that expectation of itself was causing damage and harm to her, to myself, and our marriage. Yeah. And so I needed to rethink all that. But yeah, I hope there's a guest that I have that is said, no, I had a level 10. This is how I did it. And I'm still searching for that guest.
Good luck on.
I'm young, so I got 35 years plus to find that.
Part of the answer, I think, is that it's hard. Jesus had 12 disciples. They all left him. One got him killed. And he's got insight into people, and he picked them. So. One doubted him unless they saw him in flesh and blood.
Yeah.
And
maybe you're right. I'm still holding.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with aspiring to improve your relationship.
Yeah.
That's wonderful, and I compliment you for that goal and desire to keep getting better, and that's part of kind of who I am. Is I'm searching for excellence. Good is not great, and good is the enemy of great. And you want a great marriage, and that's wonderful. And it sounds like you're well on your way, but we shouldn't be afraid to seek professional help if you feel like that would help.
Yeah. All right. So let's get back to I guess, to where you're at now. So you did consulting.
Yeah, so I did consulting, and then I got a call from somebody who I had worked with at OSPI, and they had an opening in their school district office. And
So that's another state job.
So that's another state job, but it's a local, not a state level, but it's still part of the public funds. So I end up becoming the head of student information and assessment and research and data in the Renton School District, and worked for the superintendent there, who I had worked with closely down.
Did you have to move down there?
So at that time, I'm doing consulting. My wife has left me, and I meet this new person on eHarmony. So during that process of dating her and realizing we were both meant for each other, I move from Bainbridge Island and I get the job in Renton, and I move over to where I live now in Kirkland, and I move in with her. I sell my house on Bainbridge, and I commute from Kirkland down to Renton for 4 years. And then certain things happened down there, plus the traffic was killing me going through.
Yeah, I bet.
That was bad traffic. And so I found a similar job up in Mukilteo, and I did that work for another 6 years. So now I've got, 17, 18 years in the state system with a couple of different retirement systems.
Yeah.
And so that was my 9th career, is working in school district offices.
Yeah. So you're pretty, for a guy that only taught for 2 years, you probably understand education better than
And when I left the
teachers and
Gates
principals.
Foundation, I finished my doctorate at University of Washington in education leadership and policy. So now I reap the benefits of that when I work for a school district financially. But it's nice to be called doctor. I mean, somehow it gives you some sense of status. I mean, I had been around people with PhDs for years. They were not that different than me. I had a master's, but it wasn't a PhD. It's not that hard to get one. You just have to pay your money and go through the process. Doesn't mean that you're super smart.
Yeah, my dad, he got his PhD in theology, and my friend, he got his PhD in bot. So he knows this plant really, 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 really well. And I was like, "And what are you going to do with it?" He's like, "I'm just the world expert on this particular plant."
Yeah, and I'm a generalist, so now I've got 3 degrees in totally different subjects. I've worked now it's my 9th career all over the world, lived in other countries, other cultures, traveled to 70 plus countries. So I'm a generalist. And actually there's a book called Range, which basically says the people who make the biggest difference in life are people who have a variety of experiences, because they can then draw on all those experiences to help solve unique problems. They have insights that other person would.
That's what's really interesting about Elon. Whether you hate the guy or love him or respect him, I respect him because he has his hands in so many different things. And when I listen to his podcast with Lex Friedman, it's like the dude's talking about hands like he's a hand specialist. But the reason why he had to look into how the human hand works, because he's creating a robot. And he's like, yeah, whoever designed our body, because they're like, do we put the machinery in the hands or do we put it in the forearms? So let me look at the human body. So it's very interesting how in depth that he can go into so many different topics.
Yeah.
And there's very few people a lot of people pretend like they know, because you can go an inch deep, but he's gone a mile deep on so many different topics that it's like, and then he can have this conversation about space, but then he can have this conversation about the brain, and you're just like, wow, his ability to retain information and then give it back to you like you're in 2nd grade
in a way that you understand.
Yeah, that's like that's
you got to
rare,
really know it to be able to simplify it down and communicate.
So sometimes people don't think he's that intelligent. He's actually very intelligent, and
it takes more brains to communicate that way.
yeah.
It's like teachers have to know their subject so well that they can then simplify it to get it across to people who don't know it at all. So I'm in, now up to 2020, and I'm finishing my 9th career, and COVID hits, and I'm 66. I'm about ready to retire anyway at 66 and a half because my wife's going to turn, 65. And it just seems like the natural time to, I wouldn't say retire, but make another change.
Focus on what you really want to focus on.
Well, and I've been interested. All my jobs have been interesting. I've learned something from all of them, and it's made me a good person, a good citizen. I understand the world. I've learned to ignore things that aren't important and to focus on things that are. And I know how to read for knowledge, for wisdom. I'm widely read in lots of different topics. I don't know, British monarchs. I don't know, the classics in, literature. I haven't read those books. About the only one I've done was Wuthering Heights, but, it's like, please help me. So I'm into nonfiction, truth, and making the world a better place and understanding world events. And just, as you get older, you realize, in some ways things are complicated, but in other ways, it's actually pretty simple.
You can simplify it to yourself.
Yeah, and people have a certain kind of set of tendencies, and they're motivated by certain things, and you need to suspend judgment and not leap to conclusions about where a person's coming from based on, what they say or how they look or the clothes they wear or whatever. And I've evolved enough to know that, I don't have to try to prove I'm a man. I don't have to have big muscles. There's an emotional side of me. I actually cry pretty easily. It's not because I'm sad. It's just because I feel things very deeply. And
Was that always a thing for you? Or did that something develop later in life?
I don't think I had the reasons to have those strong emotions. I cried when I dealt with my divorce, but I also can cry when I see my kids doing something fabulous. It's not sadness. It's just a very strong emotion that causes tears to flow. And that happens to me all the time. I'm a deeply feeling person, in part because I think I have a variety of life experiences that give me empathy and know what it's like to be in that position. And there's beauty in wonderful things all the time. So I decide that I still have a lot of gas in my tank. I'm 66 and a half. My parents died at 93. I potentially have at least 20 more years of life. And I don't want to waste it. I don't want to waste a crisis. And what I was good at was taking complicated issues, studying them, and describing them in ways that are easy to understand for busy people who don't have time to look into all that, do all that research. So I did that at GAO. I did that with the legislature. I did that with some of the works I've written for the state. I try to simplify, teaching and learning for different people. And so I've spoken at conferences and done PowerPoints and written other things. And so it's like, okay, now what am I going to do? And being a Christian person who has been exposed to Christianity and the Bible for 50 years, I thought, I still don't know it that well. And so I'm going to take time for the next 8 months or so to study it, but make it understandable for myself, but also for other people. So I decided to summarize the Bible, which is, if it were written like a regular book, it would be 2,000 pages long. And it's actually 66 books all kind of crammed together in a very unusual way. So it's like, this will be a challenge. Some people said, you really think you should be rewriting the Bible? I was like, I'm not rewriting it. I'm just summarizing it. Trying to make it make sense to me and put it in a logical order, because right now it's really kind of duplicates, and it's a weird organization. It's not in chronological order. The prophets who speak to the Israelites who are, being rebellious are all jammed at the end, and it's like, who are they talking to? So I end up taking the next 9 months to create a draft and submit it for publication, and it gets edited through the publisher, and eventually, a year later, it hits the market. It's the short Bible, a chronological summary of the Old and New Testaments. And so that was a year and a half of work. And then I realized when I analyzed the language and the sentence structure and the vocabulary, it ends up being about a 10th grade reading level. I'm thinking, first of all, that's too high, because a lot of people don't have that kind of reading level, and I want it to be available to younger people. I remember sitting in the dentist chair, and my dental hygienist said, "I'm just so excited to read this book to my kids." I'm thinking, no, it's not. It's an R-rated book. There's like rapes and beheadings, and it's like, oh, it's like awful. So it's like, I gotta sanitize this a bit and shorten it up a bit. So I created the simplified short Bible. So it's shorter. I have a student edition, so if somebody wanted to use it as a study or, in school, they could do that, because, I'm thinking education-wise, you're going to teach it in a private school, and, at the end of each chapter, there's got to be a set of, keywords that you got to know. So I organize it that way, add in a pronunciation guide, add in study questions. And in the last 6 months or 8 months, I decide it's still too long, because I'm having it translated into other languages, but a lot of people in the world who've never heard the story don't even know how to read. Or if they do, they've got maybe a second or third grade level of reading, and they're not going to pick up a Bible. So I created the very short Bible, which is, you can read in probably a day or two. And it would be easy for it to be put into an audiobook, an ebook, and then people can read it on their phone or listen to it. And they will at least know what the story is about. My son, we've talked about him, my stepson, he's an atheist. So I said he's not the same place we are. And we would have these arguments about the Bible and what the Bible teaches. It's like, where did he get these ideas? He said the Bible taught pedophilia. And it's like, what? So, he drunk the Kool-Aid from his atheist professors, and has just really strange ideas about what the Bible's about. So the book is written for people like him. The book is written for people who want to be able to read the most read book of all time, but don't have, a year.
This is another version to the short?
So it's the short, the simplified short, and the very short. And then these are being put into other languages, because ultimately I think the Bible really is a love story. And the implications of a love story is that you forgive and you're generous, and you stick with people, and that's really what the world needs now. And most people do not understand who the person of Jesus was, how he got, what got him killed, what his teachings were, because they see Christians living a certain way. It's like, hey, I have nothing to do with them. So anyway, this is a way for people to learn the story and have it consumed quickly, and maybe some of their misconceptions will go away. So now, for the last 4 years, I've been an author. It's my 10th career.
Nice.
And I also created a nonprofit organization, so that any royalties that come to me from these books, I put it in that nonprofit organization, and to be given away to other people who are in need. So, and I started a new publication company. So
Is that because you were frustrated with your old
I was frustrated with the companies that were producing my other books because the first one, they didn't do foreign translation. So I had to find somebody that would put it in Spanish. So I contracted with another company. Then I had to have a student edition and a simplified version. Um, so I've had other companies involved with that. And now I'm using AI to make the initial translation into other languages. And then I have somebody who's an expert in that language review it to make sure that the translation is good. Punctuation's good, grammar's good. And then this new company can publish it under their logo. And I'm creating all my other books, and I'm consolidating under this one publishing company, which is nonprofit. And then I have control
Why
over
would you make it a
royalties.
nonprofit versus profit?
Because I'm not in it for money, and so I want to make the prices affordable. Because there's a lot of scam companies out there inviting people to work with them, to publish stuff, to market their stuff, and there's a lot of really bad actors out there. So,
I mean, making a nonprofit, you don't have to pay taxes.
well, I'm not exactly sure. Probably not. You have to register with, the IRS and the state. And I'm dealing now with the IRS trying to get this new publishing company to be tax exempt. It might not be that way. It's not like we're taking donations. But we're going to have affordable prices, and we're going to be trustworthy, and we can do the work faster. And I don't need the money. I've got Social Security, and I've got all these other pensions.
3, right?
So
So you have Social Security, federal, and state
yeah.
at minimum.
So and I got IRAs and stuff like that, and I got 2 houses. We got a lot of money tied up in this house and another place. So I don't need the money. I'd rather just hire good contractors, pay them a decent wage, and then not really take anything for myself and pass the savings on to other people who can publish their books at an affordable price. They get 100% of the royalties. Nothing comes to me.
Nice.
We only pay our contractors. I'm the only employee, and everybody else works on a contract basis. So, we'll pay them based on the work they do. And they're happy, and the authors are happy. They get published, and they can maximize their royalties, and they have total control over the rights. So if somebody loves the story and wants to make it into a movie, they get all the profits.
Nice.
So we're not.
So if someone uses you as a publisher, they can still turn a profit.
Oh, absolutely.
So even though your organization's a nonprofit, they can.
Yeah, they own the rights. The copyright is for them.
Nice.
So all we're doing is making sure that it's written well, it gets on the market, gets put on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. It has the Library of Congress number. It's got the barcode stuff, ISBN numbers, and we have other services that they can buy if they want it translated into another language or made into an audiobook or help with marketing. They can pay extra, but that's on them. They choose. We're not going to be out there trying to get them to do something that we think isn't going to be wise. There's a lot of people promoting book fairs or, blah, blah, blah. They end up not being a good use of money. There's not a return on investment. So anyway, I sympathize with the people who want to publish a story. They've got a great story. And as soon as it gets published, they're bombarded with phone calls and emails from people who are scam artists. And it just makes me sick. So having experienced it over the last 4 years, I know that there's a need for a reputable nonprofit publishing company that offers good services at an affordable price and can turn things around in 2 or 3 months rather than 9 months, if ever. So anyway, I've learned a lot in my life.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm in my 10th career.
Couple of fun questions. We talked about what are some things that you can need to experience versus things that you can learn, and you had thought about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mentioned a few in the first part one. but there's a few others. One is trauma. We really don't know what that's like until we experience it ourselves. So it could be a divorce, it could be a death, it could be an assault on our body, and it changes your life, like permanently. I mean, I've really not experienced trauma like other people in my family. I mean, I've taken on. I've been in traumatic situations, but it's not like been personal to me. I mean, divorce is tough. Marriage, it's not trauma, but marriage is another thing. Like you don't really get it until you're in it. Another thing that people don't really get until they're in it is when they go into another culture. When you travel and it's totally different. And it goes back to the very first story I told in part 1 about the fish that leaves and comes back, and the other fish doesn't even know what water is because they've never left their home. So you don't really get to know that until you actually leave. I think one of the biggest things I learned about America and myself was when I first went overseas. And the more dramatic place you go, I mean, there are places in Asia that are very different than the Western world. That's another thing. I think another thing is that when you aspire to be excellent, like in a sport, you don't have any idea what that's like. I mean, I played football for 7 years and basketball for many years also. But, you know, we turn on the TV in September and watch 2 teams play in football. But the things that they went through in order to get on the field with practices and weightlifting, and, you know, it's just like you have no idea how hard it can be. And in college, we had 3 practices a day for a couple of weeks. And it was like, are you kidding me? And it just goes on and on and on. And there are people who can do it, but not be on a great team, but to be really, really good takes something extra. I mean, we just finished watching the Olympics. And, you know, we see these athletes come in 4th and they get nothing for it. But the amount of work that went into getting 4th is like incredible.
Yeah,
and
the person
no idea
that got the last place in the marathon, it's like they're still not top 40 in the world.
Yeah. So we really don't know what it's like to reach high levels of performance until we've done that. I mean, I've met people who are really great in life, and you find out about their background, and they often were people who were outstanding in some way, whether it's a musical instrument or a sport. I'm really glad that women are now having the ability to be involved in sports. Back when I was young, they had nothing. They had cheerleading. There was no sport for, you know, there was no women's basketball team until Title IX came along. I went to the high school where we had a pool and we were state champions perpetually. And there was one girl that would work out with the other guys, and she ends up going to the Olympics and getting 4th or something. But she actually sued the government, which led to Title IX, which allowed them girls to have more access to sports. And that's only been in the last 50 years. So I'm really glad that girls now have that opportunity, because sports can be such a rewarding experience from lots of different directions. So those are the things.
Speaking of trauma, though, if you want to, I don't play video games, but if you're playing there's certain video games where you try to build a character, right?
I don't play video games. I'll trust you on that.
Yeah, you have this character, or if they take a sport, right? If you play like a basketball game, you have this character, and then over time you build that character up. So now he's 99 and shooting 99 or whatever. So in life, you're building your character as well. But the answer I'm still trying to find, and maybe it's a subjective answer, but too much trauma can be detrimental. No trauma can make you
Shallow.
shallow, or just you can't then handle, because life is traumatic.
Yeah.
And so finding that healthy dosage, right? And it's something extremely wealthy people deal with their kids, because money is never an obstacle for them. A lot of those kids end up being even more depressed because they're like, I'll never amount to the money that my parents will ever make. And they almost have no purpose in life. Because for most people, one of their main struggles that they have to overcome is making money, right? And so when that problem is not a problem anymore, they can kind of get depressed. So that's a common theme I'm finding. And as I speak to people, I may not ask them directly, but there is a trauma that can be too much, right? Sometimes we label it as big T, little t. And for my kids, I'm trying to find that for them is, as sometimes as parents, you want to be a helicopter parent, which I have no desire to do that, but we remove all obstacles from the child, but we also don't want them to experience what your kids did, right? Because that would be big T trauma. And so finding that, how do you put artificial trauma in their life, and what does that look like, and to what extent? Not that you have to answer the question, it's just me thinking out loud. When it comes to trauma, it's the military tries to do that, right? When you join the military, if you're a Navy SEAL, then they're going to put significant amount of trauma on you. And
Because you need to be able to undergo that stress.
And you'll wash out if you can't handle it. So the military understands that, but as a human being, you should probably also plan for some trauma in your life, but it's hard sometimes to know what amount and what dosage to give yourself.
I think trauma isn't maybe the right word. It's stress.
Yeah.
And stressors. I handle stress well. There are lots of stressors that would, cause people to just freak out or have a panic attack or whatever. And I've been kind of trained to deal with stress. But I'll use an analogy with my wife. She's a 5th grade teacher. And she would have meetings with the parents before school would start. And she would say, if your child forgets their lunch, don't bring a lunch. Let them feel what it's like to have no lunch. They need to feel the consequences of what happened. If you rescue them all the time, they won't learn that lesson. And they need to learn. And if they don't do their homework and they turn it in and they get a F or a 1 or whatever it is the grading scale is, it's not the end of the world. And this is 5th grade. It's not like they're not going to go to college. Let them feel the stress and the pain of what it feels like to fail and to screw up, because those are little lessons that will help them become resilient and persevere, and it builds grit. And we tend to rescue people too much. We don't want to have anything bad happen to them, but they need to be able to play in the neighborhood and climb a tree. And you know what? They might fall and they might break something, but they will learn from that. And yes, that's scary as a parent, but you got to do it. And let them fail early so they learn what it's like, and they learn the lessons, so it's going to be they'll be more likely to deal with stress down the road because they've dealt with a little bit of it early on. So it's not trauma. We don't want to traumatize anybody, but people need to learn that they will fail, they will not succeed, and they need to keep getting up, and we need to encourage them. There's a term that we use for a good teacher. They are warm demanders. So they have the emotional connection, but they also have high expectations. So you reach for the stars and you do the best you can, and you're there when people don't reach that. And you just say, keep on trying. You haven't done it yet. Yet is a key, because there are some people that were told you'll never do this, or you failed. And it's like, you didn't make it this time, but you will keep getting there. You haven't done it yet, but we're going to stick with you until you get to the point where you've actually accomplished what you want to do. So we've got to stick with people, but we got to let them fail, and we got to point out that when they haven't, you want to shoot for A. You don't C, B isn't good enough. There are people who are satisfied with being C and B. Fine. They're not going to make a difference in life.
Yeah, military term is fail forward. Fail forward. A couple last questions. I recently turned 36, and you're almost twice my age at this point. But what is knowledge or something that you understood as you got older in life that you're like, man, that would have been helpful to have picked up when I was younger?
Um,
Whether it was experience or
Something that I wish I had learned at a younger age.
or even at my age.
Life's not fair. Life's hard.
Didn't you know that at a younger age?
Well, I never thought about it. But I think,
I'm not doubting what you learned, but
I think
you did not learn that. Yeah.
I think the importance of having empathy. I'm a pretty stoical person that I'm more open with my emotions. I think I didn't suffer fools gladly early on. And so I was pretty cocksure that I knew the answer. And often I did, but I went about using that perspective in a harsh way. And so diplomacy, empathy, these are the soft skills, you might say, that are worth developing. I think we never know what is going on in another person. We should not be judging other folks. We haven't been in their shoes. We need to cut people slack for what they're doing. We shouldn't be judging. And life is going to work out. We don't have to strive so much to make it work. And there's a balance in striving, but also kind of letting life be. You never know what you're going to get. So I don't know if that helps. I learned a lot. By the time I was 40, I learned so much. I felt like I had a full life. And now I'm just kind of refining things. I'm being more generous now, more free with my money. But then I have the ability to do that. But I am taking risks now with my own life and my time and my money that seem foolish to people. But I'm thinking of the end goal of what I want to accomplish. Like, think about what you want to have written on your gravestone, or what do you want people to be saying about you when you die? What are they going to say? And live a life that you would be proud to have people talk about. And for most people, they're normal. They're living a normal life. For me, for some reason, I think I'm special.
Your mom told you that?
Well, I've thought that. I mean, I had to tell, I had the great on my Converse All-Star tennis shoes because I just had confidence. And there's a naivete to that. It's like, what makes me great? But I keep trying to make a difference in life. And I don't always, I screw up many times. I've said and done many stupid things. But I know I should just keep going. And I don't see obstacles. I see something that is in the way that I have to go around to reach my goal. I'm a person I see the glass a quarter full. I see possibilities when other people see failures. So I don't give up. I have great faith that things can work out if they're good. And I think we can do way more than we think we can. When you're in the military, they have some just unbelievably unconscious goals for you. And guess what? You meet them. We can do so much more than we think. It's up here. That's the obstacle. We think we can't. You know, the little engine that could, you know, you think you can, and you can do amazing things. So I'm still trying to do that, and I'm 70. I figure I got at least 10 or 15 good years to still try to make a difference in the world, and that's what I'm trying to do now.
Good answer. This podcast is called The Game of Life. And so if you would, and you've kind of already answered it, but you want to give a more succinct answer or whatever, life is ... to you.
Life's an adventure that should be embraced. Life involves risk. And we should not shy away from those things, because nothing really good comes without striving and risking, and taking a chance that something good can happen. We should not feel a fear of failure, but it's an opportunity to make a difference. And yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell. We can do great things, but it takes courage, energy, integrity, perseverance. And if you think about where you're going, it keeps you going. If you don't have some kind of ultimate purpose, you will give up. Viktor Frankl, who was a Swiss psychiatrist in Europe, who was in Auschwitz, he looked at...
What's his book?
Logotherapy, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
He looked at people who were killing themselves and the people who survived. And the ones that survived had a purpose. Whether it was to get revenge on the Nazis or family that they needed to be connected with.
There's something to look forward to.
There was something outside of themselves that they were shooting for. There was a reason to live. And I have a reason to live. And I write about it in the author's perspective of my book, The Short Bible. So it keeps me going. I have goals that are way bigger than I can ever accomplish, but I can make a dent in them. And I'm excited for the things that are ahead. I'm not resting. I'm still staying busy, and I'm 70.
Have you heard of the book Who Not How? So this guy's like a business mastermind, and he's just like, look for the who's, not how you can do something. And so if you look for the who's, then you can have someone like yourself can have a dream and a vision, and rather than trying to figure out how it's going to be done, you find a who that's then going to go do the how for you. And that's kind of where you're at in life because of all your general knowledge. You're someone that could find people who don't have the experience that you have, but you already have the vision in your mind, and you don't necessarily have to know how it's going to get done, but you're going to go find someone that has high expertise, or you're going to put faith and belief into someone to say, you go figure it out, and I'm going to bless you in how to figure it out. So that's kind of where a lot of people, when they hit retirement, they just watch TV all day and don't make a difference. But you could go the opposite way, and you're like, I'm going to go find guys in their 20s and 30s who don't have the life experience, who don't have the vision, they just need someone to believe in them. And I'm going to believe in them, and I'm going to help them find the keys and help them give them the vision to then go complete these things. Because if you have the big dreams that you do, if you try to accomplish them yourselves, you probably won't be able to. And that's why the book goes back to it's the who, not the how. Go find the who's, and they'll figure out how to do it for you. They just need someone like you to kind of put the pieces together for them.
Or support them, or give them the tools
Yeah.
and the vision to keep them going, keep the cause going. I mean, Jesus left, he had 120 followers when he left the earth. 120? Are you kidding me? He talked to thousands and thousands of people, and he had this motley crew of people, but they believed. They saw there was a reason, and they had an experience that changed their life, and that kept them going. And you think about Saul, who became Paul, and how his life changed and what he suffered over the next 30 years or so. There was something that kept him going, and he had to escape a lot of places where he was about ready to be killed. So it is not easy to choose the path I'm on. There's a lot of discouragement. There's way more discouragement in what I'm doing now than what I was doing before, because there's so much resistance to the message of what I'm trying to spread. But I do get reminders often that I'm on the right path, and that I should not be surprised that, the seeds that fall on the ground, not that many of them produce fruit. So we'll see. But I've got a reason to live that's way bigger than myself, and I'm thinking about other people and supporting my kids, even people who don't believe like me, whether it's a neighbor who, needs a widow that's in need for something.
Can add her as a concubine.
Yeah, well,
Just kidding.
Yeah, there's just so many interesting things happening in the world, and I'm not a pessimistic person. I mean, I see lots of discouraging things and conflict and trauma, but I also see that there's a way through this.
Yeah, and there's one last question I want to ask you, but when they look at young people today, the vision that we're giving them is climate change. It's a lot of depression, not a lot of hope. And if you give a young person not hope, then it is hard to think about the future in a good way. And it's like, no, we should be giving hope to.
We need solutions.
We always need hope,
yeah.
But more so for the young people, so that they're optimistic about the future, no matter how bleak it looks. But so here's my final question. And I met you at the gym. You weren't benching 300 pounds, but I met you there. And I'm trying to convince people who aren't into fitness to get into fitness. You don't have to convince me. It's part of my life. I enjoy it. I don't go more than 3 days without some sort of exercise. I don't go more than 2 days or even 24 hours. But I think that as I talk to people in their late 30s who are realizing age is catching up, and I didn't put much focus into my initial adult years. It's like, no, you should, because if you don't, there will be health complications, health issues. And I'm curious in your life how health has been a factor, and then how you've seen it in other people. Like I was talking to my handyman yesterday, and he was like, yeah, I'm just coming back from a funeral. And I was like, oh, how old was the lady? 58. What did she die of? A stroke. And then I was like, was she overweight? Yes. She was on medications. So you can look at all these things in her life that led to that stroke. It wasn't random. We think it was random, but it was like, no, it was a lifestyle that got to that point of, some would say, premature death. And so I don't necessarily want to scare people into health and fitness, but it's like, I guarantee you, if that lady, if you asked her the day before the stroke, hey, tomorrow you're going to have this issue, what would you do differently? Guess what? She'd probably say, I probably wouldn't have gained as much weight as I did, and I probably would have worked harder on those things but it's too late for her, right? She can't come back and be like, hey, everyone, take this a lot more serious. So I'm curious how you thought about health and fitness as you got older, and have you seen friends pass away premature because of not taking their health serious?
Yeah, I've been blessed with good genes. My parents died of natural causes at 93.
And they probably didn't have much of a workout regime. Or did they just not get overweight?
No, they just, I mean, my dad ate all the wrong things and his cholesterol was low. My mom ate dieting all the time and it had cholesterol that was high. It's like, that's the way they were wired. Luckily, I got some pretty good genes on the health side of things. Plus, I was an athlete, so I was just naturally was always
Did you keep
doing
that up
stuff.
though into your 40s, 50s, and 60s?
No. I mean, coaching my kids' basketball team and baseball team, kept me active. And I'd get out there and I'd play a little bit. And having a teenager kept me active. I'd play, pick up basketball out in the cul-de-sac, into 10 o'clock at night. And I wouldn't want to lose. So I was still active, I would say up to the age of 50 or so. But life, one, your body just starts to change. And two, there's stuff that happens at work that you just requires time. I didn't belong to a gym for a long time. But as you see your body start to deteriorate, you realize, and the weight goes on. I mean, I'm 30 pounds more now than I was when I was at my peak, playing football in college. Now I was, 10% body fat. Now it's a lot more. And so I'm aware of my body going downhill. I'm aware of my calories being put on. I'm aware of the fact that, I don't burn calories like I used to. So it doesn't take much for me to put on a pound or two. Ice cream, pizza, pasta, there's a balance between, you got to enjoy life. I love dark chocolate, but I know that I need to watch it. So I have some set weights that I'm striving for. And I don't want to go up above that. Luckily, I can lose, weight fairly quickly, just by not eating. So in some ways, my wife actually had a heart attack, a couple years ago. That was a wake-up call for her. That changed her habits in terms of eating, working out, that kind of thing. So, but she had a brother who died at 58, or maybe it was 56. And what was the root cause of that was what I would call a broken heart, because he got divorced and his wife had lots of money, wouldn't take him to court, and she got custody of 3 kids, and she kept them away from him, and he wanted to have a relationship with his kids, but he didn't, and so he drank. And his organs eventually and he wasn't working out. His organs just left him, and they stopped working, and he died. He dropped dead, in a kitchen, because he hadn't taken care of himself.
And that's what I'm trying to get people to understand. It's like you don't have to take care of your body. Sometimes people do have really good genetics and they do make it to 90, but that's more rare than the norm. And the norm is if you aren't deliberate about your health, you will most likely either have a low quality of life or you will pass away in your 50s and 60s. And a lot of people don't actually consider that. They don't actually realize that their lifestyle will affect that. And so as I talk to my friends in their late 30s, it's like, look, you still have a chance. Even if some people aren't actively harming their body, which even if you don't sleep well, that's actually not beneficial. But I'm just trying to get people to be a little bit more serious about it, because they look at a lot of deaths and a lot of them are lifestyle based. And
we're learning more about what it takes to live longer. And it's lifestyle, it's eating, it's exercise. it's also having the right social relationship.
Right.
So it's a balance. And some people just, they know it up here, but they just can't, they don't have the energy or whatever to do it. Willpower to get off the couch, to
I would
eat the
say
right
you have to
stuff.
have a big enough why.
Yeah,
If you don't have a big enough why, then
yeah,
you're not going to suffer. So
yeah.
I'm going to go into a deficit this winter. And if I did have enough big enough why, because what that basically means to me is I'm going to go to bed hungry every night for 2 to 3 months. My why is it's kind of funny, but right now I'm at about 15% body fat, which is decent at my age.
Really? 50%?
15.
Oh, 15. Okay.
1.5. If I was 50,
Yeah, I was like, you don't look like 50.
I'm at around 15%.
Yeah.
And if you're in your mid 30s, late 30s, that's usually pretty good.
Yeah.
But now my kids are challenging me and they're like, they're not quite fat shaming me, but they're like, Dad, we have a six pack. Where's yours? And so it's like, okay, that's a big enough why for me to work on it this winter, is to, not that I'm going to starve myself, but when you go into a deficit, you have to eat a little less calories than you would normally want. And that's my why, to get me through the winter. So when I'm going to bed
So
hungry,
you're doing it so that your kids will love you.
no, not that they'll love me.
They won't shame you.
It's partly a joke, but partly of, I want to do, by the time I'm 40, I want to be at 10%. And then
what's your why for that?
for the why for that is my long-term goal is I'm an athlete of life. And so I don't need to, there's no more physical accomplishments I feel like I need to do at this point. I've done marathons, I've benched 3 plates. There's a lot of things I did in my 20s, and now it's like, can I live a high quality of life for as long as possible? I don't even need to live a super long life. I'm trying to live a high quality of life. And I think if I can do that 10%, that's a model to other people around me, to my kids, but then just to people in general, to be like, hey, this is possible. It does take a little bit of deliberate thought and action, but it's not that hard once you get to that point. Short term, I have short term goals, and this winter it's like I've done many deficits before just because I want to maintain my weight. But now that my kids are like, hey, Dad, we're out here crushing life. What are you doing? And it's like, well, I am, but they don't understand things are different when you're a little older. So yeah, I make mini goals for myself.
What's your wife think of that?
About what?
About your goal?
Oh, she doesn't care. I used to weigh. I was at 22% a few years ago, and she didn't complain then. And I looked in the mirror and I was like, I don't like what I'm looking at. So that started a health journey for me to drop some weight. But I think about obesity a lot, not for myself, but it's a big problem. Over 70% of the U.S. population is overweight.
Yep.
And I would argue most of those people don't want to be. I'm literally listening to a book right now called Fat Chance. It's all about just that issue in America and worldwide. But yeah, health, I think, I talk to friends that make a lot of money, and it's like, dude, if you don't have your health in your 50s, what's the point? There was a Google executive. She passed away at 58, and she was worth 800 mil. I guarantee you, and from cancer, I guarantee you, she would have given away 800 of that mil. She would have given it all away, if she could, to not pass away from cancer at 58. And so, yeah, you can make all the money in the world, but what's the point if you pass away in your 40s and 50s?
And that's the point, is what's the point?
Yeah.
Why? What's your why? What's your goal? What's your vision? What's your tombstone going to say? You should ask yourself the same question.
Yeah. No, my whys for health. I have, I was just listening to a podcast the other day. The lady was 103 years old, and obviously very good genetics, but she was also deliberate about, she's holistic. And so I look at people that live a long time and look at some of their habits and things like that. But I enjoy it. It's a hobby of mine to exercise, and I know not everyone's going to like it into the same manner that I do. But there's too much data and science out there that's like, you have to stimulate your muscles. If you don't, you're going to have a low quality of life, and you're probably going to have higher medical costs. And I don't want either one of those.
Yep. Well, I'm trying to watch what I do. I'm trying to balance, pleasure and health and purpose. And sometimes I just want a piece of deep pan pizza from Chicago. With the beer.
You can work in cheap meals if you want. It's just when that becomes every day, then.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's we're pretty. The eating habits in America are pretty disgusting.
Yeah. Well, any last thoughts? I know we've spent, I don't even know how long today was, but over 5 hours. Yeah.
I don't even. We probably have total of 6 or so.
Yeah.
Thanks for being interested in the lives of other people. I compliment you on your desire to learn about what makes life tick for people who are older. Probably, unfortunately, there's a lot of people whose lives are pretty boring. I haven't had a boring life. I've been blessed in many ways. I still have another 15 good years to go. I have really no regrets other than, stupid things I say and do here and there. But from overall, I'm satisfied and excited. I'm satisfied with my life and, interested and excited to see what is coming next. And I think probably this will be my last career, but you never know.
Hey, you never know.
Taking risks, doing, jumping out there. And, it's not like I was 10 years old and wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer. I didn't have that. I've just kind of wandered through life, opening and closing doors and, being directed to where I am now.
What's interesting about your story is a lot of times when people feel unsatisfied with where they're at, rather than looking for change, they just double down into whatever they're doing. Where with you, because I thought about your story the first time we talked, and just thinking about your story now was because I was always like, how do you know when to go to the next phase? And for you, it was just you reflected on where you're at and you're like, I'm ready for something else. Where most people, if they were faced with that decision, they would just be like, well, this is the life I have. I'm going to keep that security. I'm going to go do this job for the next 30, 40 years. And part of them dies.
Yeah, they're living out of fear. They're afraid of the risk. They want to be secure. They want to be safe. And that's no way to live, frankly.
For you, that's a life for someone else, but not for you.
And I think to really enjoy life, you have to take risks, and you have to step out into areas of discomfort.
Yeah. All right. Bonus question. I recently came up with this term. I have my own working definition, but define maturity. What makes a human being mature? Not in like maturity of financial instruments, but
yeah. Somebody who can put aside their own interests for the benefit of other people. Selfless, not selfish. That takes maturity.
Yeah, because not every old person is mature.
True.
But you can have someone that's young that's mature.
True.
In whatever thing because of how you defined it. But yeah, it's just something I've been thinking about. All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
I'll see you around.
Bye.